This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
Marriage and social arrangements have been a topic of discussion in many literary works. Jane Austen, in particular, uses humor to describe the strong focus on marriage as a necessity for a woman during the 19th century. In Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, Mrs. Bennet is portrayed comically. She is focused on setting up marriage arrangements for her daughter, does not have good manners, and lacks good judgment. Despite this, she is a good mother and a good wife. Mrs. Bennet cares for her daughters and husband, despite the ways she chooses to show her thoughtfulness, which is often improper or inconsiderate, which makes her a good wife and mother. The context of the era during which Pride and Prejudice is staged explains Mrs. Bennet's behavior. During the 19th century, women had fewer rights and, without a husband, would have difficulty supporting themselves. Austen even describes the legal policies of that time, according to which Mrs. Bennet's daughters could not inherit their father's house. Hence, although Longbourn belonged to Mr. Bennet, who had 5 daughters and a wife, none of them would be able to own the property after his death. This put all women at risk of eviction and having no place to reside in the future. Instead, only a male representative of a household could be an heir, for example, Mr. Collins. Considering this, there is a clear motivation behind Mrs. Bennet's actions. She wanted to ensure that her daughters would have a place to live after their father's death. Therefore, the social and legal context of the 19th century provides some insight into Mrs. Bennet's actions. Mrs. Bennet's behavior shows her concern for her daughter's future. Considering the dependence of females on their husbands or fathers during the 19th century, the daughters would need a husband to support them. Women at that time were often engaged in housework, while men could have a job and earn money. Considering this social arrangement and diminished women's rights, there were few job opportunities for females, which Mrs. Bennet was aware of and therefore focused on marriage as an opportunity to have a secure life. According to Austen, the business of her life was to get her daughters married. Thus, similarly to the inheritance concerns, Mrs. Bennet's behavior is also connected to the rights of women and their ability to provide for themselves during the 19th century. Despite the social standard, Mrs. Bennet did not have to be concerned with her daughter's marriage. Instead, she could focus on her personal social life and entertainment. She could have dedicated efforts towards other things that Austen describes as outdated or comical, such as going to shops to choose hats or attending balls or other public gatherings. These things are of particular interest to the other 2 characters, Mrs. Bennet's daughters Kitty and Lydia. However, Mrs. Bennet consistently dedicates efforts to taking her daughters to social events and encourages them to meet men who can potentially become the latter's husbands. Therefore, despite having no obligation to worry about her daughter's marriage, Mrs. Bennet shows her care and motherly love by helping them find husbands. Mrs. Bennet and Mr. Bennet often quarrel and have disagreements, but Mrs. Bennet shows care for her husband. She is a good wife because Mr. Bennet perceives her as unintelligent. Mr. Bennet owns the land and is well educated, which shows a social class difference between these 2 characters. Although one can assume that Mrs. Bennet agreed to marry Mr. Bennet due to economic gain, she fulfills her obligations and takes care of the family and the household, making her a good wife. Some readers may perceive Mrs. Bennet as a bad mother and a bad wife because she lacks regard for her husband's and daughter's wishes. Moreover, she even disregarded Jane's health to arrange the latter's meeting with Mr. Bingley. In the novel, Jane is sent to visit Mr. Bingley's estate, and Mr. Bingley described this situation in the following manner: if she should die, it would be a comfort to know that it was all in pursuit of Mr. Bingley. Hence, Mrs. Bennet's focus on arranging a marriage for her daughters in some cases disregarded their health and well-being, which leads a reader to think that she was not a good mother. Mrs. Bennet, however, is a character representing typical women of her era. In Chapter 1, Austen describes her in the following manner: she was a woman of the mean undertaking, little information, and uncertain temper. When she was discontented, she fancied herself nervous. Hence, Austen describes Mrs. Bennet to show that stereotypical behavior is not good and subjects women to the need to follow outdated social standards. However, this does not mean that Mrs. Bennet is a bad person or a mother, since she merely represents a common woman. As for Mrs. Bennet's qualities as a wife, she often uses nagging to persuade her husband. Elizabeth describes the marriage of her parents by saying that she could not have formed a very pleasing opinion of conjugal felicity or domestic comfort. Hence, Austen shows that there are problems in the relationship between Mrs. Bennet and Mr. Bennet, which can force the reader to question the former's qualities as a wife. However, Mr. Bennet, who was initially mesmerized by the beauty of his wife, fails to support and appreciate her. Mrs. Bennet, however, takes care of the household and their children, fulfilling her obligations as a wife. Therefore, although the marriage between the Bennets is not ideal, Mrs. Bennet continues to respect and help her husband. Mrs. Bennet's role as a mother is to ensure that her daughters have a good life. This reasoning explains why she insists on Jane and Elizabeth getting married and praises Lydia's marriage despite her husband being a liar. Considering the social standards of the 19th century, a wedding would allow her daughters to have security. However, as a wife, her role differs because her husband shows little respect for his spouse. He often criticizes her or uses sarcasm, for example, after hearing a letter from Jane about her disease. Hence, her primary role as a wife is childbearing and caring for the household, since the relationship between Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Bennet is strained. In summary, a character from Pride and Prejudice, Mrs. Bennet is a good wife and mother. Despite her intense focus on arranging marriages for her daughters, one can understand Mrs. Bennet's behavior and appreciate her care for her daughters. She is a good mother because she is worried about her daughter's future and wants to ensure that they are not evicted after their father's death. She is also a good wife since, despite the disagreements and lack of respect from Mr. Bennet, she continues to care for the household and her family. If you want to find more works like this essay on Pride and Prejudice, Mrs. Bennet, head over to ivypanda.com. It has a collection of free samples with thousands of submissions covering virtually all academic subjects. No registration required to access it.